Alright, so as mentioned yesterday, I'm going to go in more detail about my thoughts and the general kind of thoughts of the community with the Shadows of Rose DLC that's coming out for Resident Evil Village in October of this year. I think most of the reception of it was mostly positive. They've done things with it that make the game more accessible to people, as well as it continuing the storyline of the Winters family, which is really good. Obviously some people were expecting other characters to get DLC, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm going to lay more thoughts out about it, but recap the story and what we know is happening so far, and then go from there. So without any further ado, let's just jump into the Shadows of Rose DLC. So first things first, recap of the story, or what we know of the story for the DLC. So it's set 16 years after the events of Resident Evil Village, which does confirm a time jump, and we'll get to that a bit in a moment, because people have already jumped into conclusions with that one. It's 16 years after the game. Rose has grown up, and as we know, we found out at the end of the game, she has powers of some description, and the story of the DLC basically suggests that she doesn't want them anymore. She wants to be normal, so she enters like the mindscape of the Mega Marcy, which is obviously where the mold comes from and such, and she is trying to find a way to remove her powers completely. The trailer also shows an alternate version of Rose in there who she comes across, and people are assuming it's probably Ava, who is the daughter of Miranda, who died way back, and that's the whole point of what Miranda's doing in the game. I have a different theory, and we'll get to that in a minute. We also see the Duke, who seems to be the main enemy of the DLC. A lot of fan theories around him suggest he's the Fifth Lord, and that when he collected the essences of the Fallen Lords in the main game, he became like power hungry and just wants more. So that would be pretty cool to see. But yeah, that's really all in terms of story we know of. Now I kind of want to jump into some theories and some ideas around what's going on. So let's get into that. So first, let's talk about the time jump. People are kind of jumping to conclusions at the moment. There is nothing confirmed with what the time jump does represent and what it means for the future of the series. People are kind of assuming that the Rose DLC is going to be set after the events of 9, because obviously in between her being a baby and her growing up, the events of 9 take place. Is that likely? Possibly. It's a long time since the end of Village. 16 years is a long time. And as we know, at the end of Village, Chris is pissed, basically, and is going to the BSAA to sort things out. So, you know, there's a suggestion there that 9 takes place while she's growing up, and maybe she's under some kind of protection while she grows up. So it is very possible. On the other side of the coin, keep in mind that they already said that the Winters story was going to be a trilogy that would end in Resident Evil 9. With that time jump in the DLC, there's two ways they could have done it. One, the DLC for Village is the conclusion of the Winters storyline, and RE9 is going back to the original cast. Or, Resident Evil 9 is in fact the last game in the Winters storyline, and it could still take place while she's growing up, like for instance Mia could be the main character. Or it could be actually Rose, again, and she's maybe working alongside Chris and Jill, maybe, but instead of them being like ground operatives and helping her, they're more like in her ear and giving her advice and such. There's plenty of ways they could do it, but nothing's confirmed yet, so until we see the effects of this time jump on the next game, I wouldn't jump to a conclusion and say that they've completely retconned the characters by aging them out, because I don't think they would do that. I think they're aware of how important those characters are, and would probably want to give them a good ending, rather than them just being aged out through a DLC that isn't even about them. The next idea is that the other version of Rose you see in the trailer is Ava, who is Miranda's daughter, and her consciousness has been trapped inside the Mega Marcy as well, and you come across her. I don't think it's Ava. At the end of Resident Evil Village, there's that douchebag like security guard that calls Rose Evelyn, and she gets really pissed about it, right? And then she like kind of threatens him with powers that he doesn't know, or Chris doesn't know that she can do. I think that other version of Rose is the evil side of Rose, like the Evelyn half that's inside her, because obviously she's got powers that Evelyn did have, and you know, she's part Evelyn because she's obviously a mold human, basically. She's Ethan's kid, so she's part molded. It would make sense that that's like an evil version of herself, and maybe that's the source of the conclusion of the story. Maybe she has to kind of beat that evil version of herself and eliminate it so that her powers disappear. She's just a normal person again. That's my idea. Don't think it's Ava. I think Ava died when she was very young, in terms of Miranda's daughter, so I don't think it's her. But it could be Evelyn. It could be like the evil side of Rose. That's my idea. And then of course, in terms of the Duke, he's already a mysterious character. We don't really know who he is or what he is. Obviously, there is a lot of theories around him being a secret fifth lord. There's also theories around him being more than that. He's more of a god than anything else. I'm sure the DLC will explain more of him, due to him clearly having such kind of relevance to the DLC itself. Obviously, he's got that pretty fancy mask on as well. So I definitely think he'll be some kind of enemy in the DLC. It just depends on his role in it, and maybe we'll receive more backstory of him and what he's doing and what his end game really is. So that about covers it with the information of the story of what we know so far. Obviously, whenever there's more developments and when there's more information, I'll post more. But we'll move on now from the story and into the general kind of positives, negatives about it, as well as general thoughts from the community. So one good thing straight out of the gate, I do want to throw it out there because this is actually really good for a lot of players, is the game and the DLC are being made again in third person. That is such a good idea. I know I mentioned it yesterday, but there's a lot of people out there that didn't want to play 7 or 8 because they're not fan of first person. It causes quite bad motion sickness in some people. So having the option to play it in a third person perspective really does open the game up to more people, and it does bring back that slight original Resident Evil feel. I personally can't wait to play the DLC. The DLC is exclusively in third person, but then obviously the main game is also getting an update where you can pick between first and third, which is really, really cool. And I'm really glad for people that haven't had an opportunity to play the game because of that, because 7 and 8 are brilliant games, and I can't wait to play them again in a different perspective. Another positive, briefly mentioned it before, but the Duke being involved in it is really, really good. I think his character is really, not underappreciated in the main game, but it's so mysterious that you don't even know kind of who he is. And it's the same with the merchant in RE4, he's there, but you don't really know who he is, what he is, and why he's helping you. But hopefully with the DLC and the Duke being such importance to it, by the sounds of things, we'll probably have a good idea of what his end game is and what he was really helping Ethan all along. Personally, I would say he's probably out for himself and is looking for a means to his actions throughout the end of the village. I think the power hungry theory is probably quite high. He probably has the essences of all the lords gathered, which he does because you technically sell them to him. And maybe he's using that to kind of get himself stronger, really. But that's my idea, and I'm sure a lot of people share the same idea. But I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with him. And last but not least, we'll talk about the DLC itself and the general kind of feel of the announcement of it. I know a lot of people wanted to see DLC based around the 4 lords, more specifically Lady Dimitrescu. I personally, I would be fine with it if it was, but I wasn't really kind of saying I really want a Dimitrescu DLC, because I really kind of didn't. I like the character, don't get me wrong. I think the castle part of the game is also a brilliant portion of the game, but she doesn't do much. She's not relevant. She doesn't have a goal, all she's really doing is doing what Miranda says to protect and look after her daughters, right? So she doesn't have an end game. Heisenberg had an end game. He was secretly building an entire army to fight Miranda and kill her and take control. That's so much more interesting, and I'd love to have that explored more. Same with Donna as well. I think her backstory was pretty cool. What they cut out of the game for her would have been interesting to explore, and even that would have been a different direction, in more of a horror direction. Moreau, take it or leave it. I think he's a good character. I think his section of the game is not the best, but he's still an interesting character. Also, I think that people were expecting maybe some pre-game DLC focused around the villagers. I know some villager stuff was cut from the main game, and people wanted to see kind of what was going on before Ethan turned up and how it got to how it was. I, again, would have really liked that, but it was not to be. Ada was also mentioned, but let's not forget that game content was not even in the final drafts of the game. It was concept art that was cut from the game. It didn't even make it to production, so it was never there really anyway. We just saw the concept art of an idea they had, but they said they decided not to do it due to conflicting scenarios and such, which can maybe be explained in the future, why she was cut from the game due to conflicting scenarios. But yeah, that's fine. And of course Chris was probably the one I was expecting the DLC, well, not expecting, he was the one I wanted the DLC to be about. Maybe a bridge between 8 and 9, or what his squad was doing throughout the game. I think mainly the reason behind that one not making it to the DLC was because, as good as Chris's character is and as much as he's loved, his part of the game people really didn't like. Well, a lot of people didn't like. I thought it was fun. I don't think you can really do horror with Chris Redfield anymore because he's so experienced in what's going on. You can't really make a horror game based around the character that's been there since the beginning, has basically seen everything. And that leaves us with two options. You know, you've either got Mia and exploring what she was doing and what she was doing when she was taken, and maybe a bit of a horror DLC around that and her trying to escape. Or Rose. You know, Rose after the events of the game. I mentioned this before, saying I think it would be good. I think it would probably be reserved for RE9, but I would think the idea to have a Rose DLC would be pretty cool. And that's what we've got, and I'm happy with it. Like, I think it looks really good. It looks really interesting, and it does explore more of the backstory of her, the overall kind of influence of the Mega Moisi as well as the Duke as well. So it covers a lot of broad areas, and I'm interested to see what's going on with it. So I'm happy with it. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. I'm sure you have your own opinions to kind of explore, and you know, maybe we can discuss that in the comments. But I'm happy with it. I know not everyone is, but I think it'll be something pretty cool to see. And that's going to do it with the video. This is the Shadows of Rose DLC. It releases October 28th, 2022, so a few months away. Looking forward to it, as well as all the other content that's coming with it, along with the Mercenaries updates, the third-person perspective, and of course, the DLC itself. So, leave your comments on all of this down below. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all tomorrow, where we'll be talking a bit more detail about Resident Evil 4 Remake. So I'll see you all then.